To live our life well, I think it's helpful to know ourselves. As Socrates mentioned, know thyself. If we drive a car, it helps to know something about the mechanics, maybe not into the detail of it, but the basic structure of it. The same thing goes with our life. We are busy doing this, doing that. There are lots of things happening in the world. This is the external situation of the information coming in, and we process it and relate to what's going on outside. When we have a calm and quiet mind, the interaction with outside may become much less, so our brain activity changes quite a bit. So far as you have a very calm and quiet mind. In some cases, as you meditate, we call it the monkey mind. That mind just moves from one subject to the next. It's like a network of different subjects popping up one after the other. So if you sit for 30 minutes, sometimes some people say that I spend lots of time thinking so many things, and it was not as calm and quiet. But as we experience, learn the skill to be calm, perhaps focusing on breathing or some sensation inside our, the skin, the body, not just breathing, but the feeling on the hand or legs, whatever the situation. Or it could be outside, just listening quietly the sound of bird. Those attention to what's going on at the moment may help us to understand what's really going on. And not just those sensory mechanisms tell us what's happening inside of us and around. We may start to see how the mind functions. So back to the structure of our mind and body. Daisetsu Suzuki mentioned in one of his books that there are two parallel universes, so to speak. I don't remember exact word that he used, but the same idea was shared by Mr. Nakayama, who talked about Zen and creativity, and very familiar with the Dogen. And he also mentioned about those two universes or two processes that happen within us. So I think it's helpful to go through this so that we get some structure of what's happening in terms of the processes in what we do. Obviously, when we are occupied in certain situation, busy, urgent things to do, there's no room for that. But especially when you are meditating and get the sense of calm and quiet mind, you may understand more and more about what I'm talking about. So let me give you one example that I just went through. I was going through some work to prepare a visa for immigration purpose, and there are lots of detailed things that you have to do. And you have to play with all the information stored in this file or in that file in this computer and there and process through it so that you have the right information for filing. But it gets kind of confusing because the computer was slow and the internet connection was not so effective and fast. So I was a little bit disturbed, and just reminded me of how my mind functions. Actually, that's the part of the reason why I'm talking about this. Initiated me to think about, to be clear about what can be going on inside of us. So the picture is something like this, that I'm working on those paper and the information and going through this and that. And if there's some problems here and there, we get a little bit disturbed. And if it gets more and more confusing and taking more time, then you may start to lose your calm and quiet mind. What's going on here? Why is it so slow? Or is that because of the internet? Or is this because of the computer? Or is this because I stored the information in the wrong place? Or whatever the situation is. So in living life, this situation that I explained is maybe small scale issue. But if you are the stock trader and something is happening in the world with big news coming, you may be very much confused what to do. The situation can be found by many people in different settings, but what happens in that situation often is that we are to process things so rapidly, and if the things are not organized well, we get confused. To me, that's very natural. Even the enlightened, awakened person, if he was given the situation that he need to process in the short time period, he may be disturbed in what's going on. He may not be as disturbed because he have the sort of foundation with a calm and quiet base of your mind. So that calm and quiet base, as I mentioned about, is the core process of life, if I want to call that way. As we are born, raised, or even before that, and the human being, and even before the human being, this is a process of life that is developed. And the situation is something like there's input, stimuli, and you receive it and process it to come up with the output, which hopefully will fit to the need so that you can live long. And as any species get good at it, then he start to master the skill and develop this sort of formula, the world or the universe, of how to process the information and get things out. When I talk about that, it's not requiring the brain. Let's assume this case is that very primitive, or even the human at the very small baby stage. So they may not understand the meaning of the word and the brain because it's not developed as much. But body is developed to be alive, how to breathe, how to digest, how to go to the bathroom, whatever. And it happens basically almost autonomously, obviously without thinking. So that's the foundation. And when we talk about the calm and quiet mind, when the mind is still, as I mentioned in the other video, that you throw out everything in your brain, so to speak, and then be still inside, calm, quiet, and feel the sensation passing through your body, or breathing, or the sound of the bird chirping, whatever that is. You just accept everything that it is. And if the thought pops up, you don't get tangled up in that. You just accept, oh, this is like a cloud. The thought pops up and just you observe it as if you are at the bottom of the ocean looking up and there's a wave moving around. Or maybe you are on the ground and you're looking up the cloud and the cloud is moving and passing away. So that's the image of the thought. And when I mentioned that, the two parallel universes I talked about is something like one is at the core, the basis of our being, where the life is functioning, given the stimuli and get the output, so that the whole body is functioning. Each mini-meats I talk about, in each organs, it's connected to each other, and all the blood and the lymph and all the hormone and whatever that happens in the body, they'll figure out as if decentralized way of controlling the situation. But basically, that doesn't require much of a brain power. So that will keep you alive, and when you are calm and quiet, you feel that you are that entity. and you're kind of like lifting yourself up or floating. I don't know if floating is a good example, but it seemed like it to me that everything is organized, move on its way, and that's the process of life. I'm not certain if you feel the same, because everybody's sensation and the reaction and all that could be quite different. But at the core, the basis of what's happening is like you are there without the thought. Time loses its meaning, and you are just immersed in that state. And calm and quiet, or some may call it samadhi. You are into the zone, so to speak, where the life is running its own course, and you are one that is there as well as you are observing. So you're observing and you are observed at the same time. So it's oneness. And that sensation, without the involvement of the brain, would be a very natural core state of being. And especially when you start to know this or experience this, you may get this awakening experience that the whole world that we believed before may be kind of like shuddering, or the earth, is moving like an earthquake, and your body may be shaking. Some of that can happen, but then you feel very calm, quiet. You may be even smiling without you noticing. You may find your body is supple, relaxed, and the muscle is not tense because you're not upset or anything. You're just in the state of being as it is. You are aware. You are aware of what's going on externally, internally, and that's the basic process. And we sort of train this, or a better way to say it is untrain ourselves from using a brain and disturbing the flow of what's happening inside of us, but be attentive to the situation at the core process. You may find it very peaceful, harmonious to the situation that we are in, and there's no thought, samadhi. Sometimes some insight may pop up, like small pieces of this reference and that reference, or the node of a neural network may start to communicate with each other, just like the stomach and the lung and the liver and everything is connected and do their own thing. The nerve system functions the same way. So more we do it, there will be less blockage, not much boundaries within our being. So that's nature's way of functioning what it is. And you are just not playing with it, just observing, or you're being observed, because those two are the same. And therefore, that just is as it isness, or isness as some may call it. So that's one of those two processes of the universe of how things are happening in our body, so to speak, or in our heart, when the mind is calm and quiet. Now let's go into the brain process, which is the ones that developed after so much time and history, generation after generation of what we call evolution as a nature's way of how to be human, more modern level. Not all like a monkey-like human with very small amount of words, but we are more complex, being able to process so many things. And well, maybe that may be developed because of the potential that we can have to live our life, hopefully better, with more skills to deal with the situation. But when we do that, there's a price we have to pay, if I say that way. Not sure if that's the right way to say it, but I think it's the right way to say it. Why? Because there's the joy of using the new tool called brain, but there's the potential danger or pitfall of abusing. And when it happens, we get into delusion. So more advanced and fine-tuned this new neural networks that we developed over time can be hacked, so to speak. So it's not as natural as it could be, because in the brain, we are not anymore in that being. There's a time, there's a logic. In samadhi, basically, there's no sense of time. You are in the now, in the being. When we are using our mind, in my case, I was going through paperwork on the information and playing with the computer, this and that. We are off from the basic level of living, but we are still related to the level of living, because if we do use this tool well, then we may be able to eliminate lots of unnecessary burdens that may come in life, so we can prepare by using the tools called brain well. But do we really do that? The modern day human being, in my view, myself, I have myself as a good experimental object that I go through it, so I know it, that we get trapped into this process. Because let's say if I'm going through this immigration visa and try to do it right way, but if they find that I didn't do things right because I forgot to read the fine print, or maybe the timing was wrong, that I should have done this earlier or later, but if I miss something, then there's a penalty of all the time and energy that I used, maybe in vain, or you may have to redo it, or whatever the case is. So it's the burden. There's a positivity of how we can be efficient, or possibly effective in what we do. But if we don't do a right job to prepare so that the system functions well, then we may have to pay the penalty. So this brain is a tricky universe, or the processes that we need to learn well. And I can talk more about it, but just pointing a few things. As we are growing up from little child, we learn from parents and surroundings, and they would give you some praise when you do the right thing, in their view. And if you don't do something not quite right, they may even give you some hard time. So if you have a very considerate and loving parents, that may work quite well for your benefit. But if you're born under the very different star, that your parents tend to be so and so, or one was I don't want to call it a very bad example, but for the sake of discussion, if he's a criminal or had a very bad habit, that you are born and raised under such a circumstance, though you don't have other references, then you develop those skills which may look good because interfacing with this person may be better, but as you grow and go into the society, that idea may not do well to live with other people who are operating under different value system, habit pattern, and so forth. So like you find a new, how do you call it, the friends or the partner, depending upon their upbringings and the habitual patterns value system, that may be embedded in your brain more so. But to tell a little bit deeper, the brain is connected to the body, because when you're upset, your body is feeling upset feeling. So there's a connection to it. But whatever that connection, but the brain is, if it's overdriving, then they forget that the body is suffering. And if that happens, there's not a harmony between those two systems. The one at the top, the brain system, and the one at the core, you may call it heart system, the body system. And there's a connection, but we may lose that connection. So those are the two universes and the processes that we can look into and study and feel and notice. Oh, okay, I'm using too much brain and I'm getting tired. I can understand my body is tired. Let's give it a break. That's one example of response. But if you are too urgent to do so many things, you have to get things done in a short time, then the body may suffer. And if that continues, it may even create the cancer. I don't know, but I would imagine certain impact will be developed in your body. So the harmony, alliance, connection between those two universes is something we need to, each person has to find so that we can fine tune it and not get off the rail, so to speak. I'm not sure if what I said makes sense, but in this voice memo or video, the main point that I want to capture is that if we start to understand, maybe a little bit simplifying too much, but maybe not so bad, that if we have those systems and as one being, which has those two systems functioning, we need to be able to correlate, align, make sense of the whole. I think when we dream, or sleep and dream, that's one way to process so that the discontinuity, if there is, will be addressed better while we are sleeping. And maybe dream may be one of the ideas that may pop up in that state when the mind functioning and body functioning may sort of negotiate in certain wavelength, and they try to synchronize or synthesize all the point of references that we may have, and then the whole existence is found more in updated version of relating to what's going on, so that the conflict we may develop by doing this and that, not within reason, but if it done too much, then such situation can be resolved. I mentioned the dream or the sleeping stage is one way to do that, but I tend to think the meditation could be similar. In other videos, I talk about the conscious and unconscious relationship. And that's pretty much the same as brain and heart. Or in other videos, I mentioned about use the brain, but not to be used, and listen to your heart and live with the mission. Heart has its own way, and the brain has its own way. We are made of those two parallel universes, so to speak, with certain linkage. And that linkage needs to be well understood and processed. And more we understand and process, it's like a nerve or the muscle system, we develop one whole entity instead of there's a difference within us with a conflict, as if we have a conflict and try to do things too much. Thinking too much may cause ulcer in your stomach. If we don't notice it and keep on continuing, that's not so healthy. Overall, you're not well balanced. So, the bottom line, I think thinking in those terms of two parallel universes, two processes functioning, may be meaningful. I hope I'm not overly simplifying it. But if you see yourself, how you process the information, and sometimes you may be using too much brain, sometimes you may be too little brain, I don't know. But each has its own consequence. And in this world that we live, we want to know ourselves, know thyself, as Socrates said. And hopefully you find a balanced way of life, connecting all the dots in a harmonious manner so that it makes sense to be happy in what you do and also help others and being helped from the environment. So the whole situation can be better balanced, and we can find the destiny in the process of learning ourselves and processing the information and moving forward.